Hey guys, this is Evan Richardson here from AP Government, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a landmark Supreme Court case called New York Times Company versus United States, which occurred in 1971. This case was a landmark one because our First Amendment rights were at stake. The New York Times intercepted documents regarding the Pentagon Papers and the whole scandal in Vietnam under Richard Nixon, and then began publishing this information to the public, which really ticked off the federal government and caused them to produce a restraining order, which the newspaper eventually abided by. But this just created a huge scandal, kind of questioning our rights of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And at the local level in the local courts, both in Washington, D.C., because the Post was involved as well, Washington, D.C., as well as New York, the courts just weren't settling anything, which caused the Supreme Court to have to step in. The final result of this case was a 6-3 decision by the Supreme Court, which allowed the press to continue to publish such information because of the rights granted in the First Amendment. There were many arguments presented by the 6 justices who were in favor of this decision. First of all, they referred back to James Madison, one of our founding fathers, who essentially believed that a free press and a well-educated people was an essential part to our democracy. They also agreed that our executive branch has tremendous power and influence in the field of national security, and that it must be held accountable in situations like these, when there's a huge war going on and thousands of American lives are at stake. They just agreed that if the government screws up, if the government hides information from the people, it needs to be exposed. The interesting thing about the minority opinion in this case is that they never explicitly said that the majority was wrong. What they basically said is that this was a huge decision with a ton at stake. The First Amendment rights were at stake, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and what they basically said is that they needed more time to examine the facts before they could make a really good decision on whether or not the New York Times and the Washington Post deserved the right to keep publishing. They never said that they were going to take away this right. They never said that the newspapers were wrong. All they said is that they wanted more time to gather the facts and really acknowledge the ramifications of this decision. This case put many precedents into place. First of all, the government received a strong message that it was going to be held accountable by the American people to be truthful, to be honest, and to be transparent about foreign policy. Second of all, the press was reassured that they would be able to write and speak freely and question the government. And thirdly, the executive branch was going to have to make some major changes to earn more respect from the American people. It was going to have to reduce some of the skepticism that had emerged because of Watergate, and ultimately it was going to have to build up public approval once again. One of the reasons why this case was so huge is because it really sent a new message about judicial power. This message was that judicial power would be used to defend public interest, and that it would be maximized to ensure that the government is held accountable and does not deceive the public with anything going on internally. And one of the big social ramifications of this case was that it stated that the public was entitled to this knowledge, it was entitled to know about the foreign policy action, and that the press would have the obligation to fulfill this. They would be the ones communicating with the larger population, and they would have a total right to publish whatever they'd like, to speak freely, and to offer new schools of thought.